Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. Just when you think things couldn't get any worse for Milwaukee Public Schools, they lay off hundreds of teachers. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about the Gulf oil spill and whether 2 months later President Obama is doing everything he should be doing. And we will talk about whether the University of Wisconsin gave a super high-paying job to someone just because he works right now for Governor Doyle. Joining us tonight, our newspaper columnist, Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, aide to Republican State Senator Mary Lazarus and oftentimes a host over at WISN Radio. Denise Callaway, she's the communications director for the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we'll talk about is the Milwaukee Public School System. They've sent layoff notices to nearly 500 teachers saying the budget is so screwed up that they can't afford them next year. I would think the last thing one of the worst urban school districts in America should be doing is getting rid of all these new, young, energetic teachers. So the question is this just a bargaining ploy to get those teachers and the teachers' union to accept a lower cost health care plan? Yes or no? Denise?
No, it is not, because they don't have the money. That's a simple fact. They're laying these teachers off because they don't have the money. I think they're also they have no choice but to lay off these young teachers who may be trained in newer methods of teaching and new disciplines to particularly work with urban school children because of the way the contract is laid out and you go by seniority. So it's a shame that some of these new young teachers are being laid off. My daughter goes to High School of the Arts. One of the teachers there, who's just very engaged with parents and done a ton of work in parental involvement, really doing some great things, she got a layoff notice. Not because she's not doing a good job, but because she's low on the seniority rung. But I think it does point out just how severe this issue is as it relates back to health benefits. MPS now spends, for every dollar it spends in salary, it spends almost 70 cents, an additional 70 cents in benefits. You can't run a business, you can't run a school system when you have benefit costs that are that high. If they want to save teachers' jobs, then the only way they're going to be able to do it is to make some changes in the healthcare system.
You know, Gerard, though, the head of the school board has said repeatedly, if they would all agree to this lower cost health care plan, no layoffs would be necessary.
Well, and there were some who said that the issue was never brought to the attention of the rank and file, and they hold responsible for that their own union leadership. There's another couple of factors that are involved in this with regards to the layoffs. You have multiple sources of funding, some of which only comes about on an annual or 2-3 year cycle. And when that money runs out, if it's not restored, then those people who are attached to that, if they can't get a job somewhere else within the system, they lose their jobs. And systems across the country, when they lost federal funding and specialized grants, Milwaukee Public Schools, we've had a number of special grants that have funded things like math and reading education. When those grants run out, those positions that are attached to them also disappear. There's been a backlog probably in reducing the staff that's attached to that. The second thing you have to look at is not just the benefits package that can provide some relief, but you also have performance evaluations that should be attached to what teachers stay, which teachers go, given that you lose a lot of your young, energetic teachers, as Denise had pointed out, for some of those teachers who perhaps should have been let go long ago because they were not performing up to standard or perhaps hadn't even been evaluated to determine whether or not they were performing at a level that would demonstrate they should be able to stay within the system as teachers. So I think all of these things now that they're on the table for discussion between the board, its negotiators, and the unions, I think some of those things you're going to see weeded out. You're going to see performance evaluations begin to creep into the system so that seniority isn't the only basis for determining whether or not someone stays. And you're going to see a pot of money that's a lot more stable if those school districts around the state can come together on how schools ought to be funded.
Kevin, I think this is about two things. I think it's about the health care plan and the possibility of doing away with the residency requirement.
Could be. However, it's still disappointing to see something like this happen. No one likes to see this amount of pink slips given to teachers, especially after that puff piece written by the outgoing superintendent in the Journal Sentinel last Sunday, where he said one of the major points of emphasis during his administration was that the highest priority should be in the classrooms. Well, if that's the case, well, then maybe the school board and the administration should have found a place to not cut as many teachers. And if you're going to make cuts, cut some of those high-priced administrators that are running MPS. It's very disappointing because the young teachers get knocked out. Maybe some of them don't deserve to be knocked out. Maybe some older teachers who have not been doing the job should have been included in that mix. One of the ramifications is you might turn off these young teachers now. They might just get totally dissatisfied and say, why should I go through this? I'm done with education. I'm done with teaching children. But on the other hand, the teachers knew this was coming. This was talked about for a long, long time. There were budget hearings held at 52nd and Valete. No one showed up to plead for their jobs. I was just totally surprised by that. Will MPS survive? Sure they will. There were other places to cut, I think, but they went right into the heart of education, right into the classroom. It's going to be tough, but they will survive. It'll be difficult, but they'll make it.
What kind of message does this send to the kids at UWM who are thinking about being teachers? Most of these MPS teachers come out of UWM. Does this say, hey, forget it?
Well, it's not just what this says. The way we treat education and the way this society treats education, devaluing it, not putting our resources into the classroom and into teaching. There are several things going on here. First of all, I was amazed to hear Kevin speak up for these teachers, since Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, and President Barack Obama said if we don't pass this job stimulus bill, another job stimulus bill, we're going to have to lay off hundreds of teachers in school districts all across America, and that's exactly what's happening. Don't just focus on MPS. This is happening all across America because we are not putting the funds into education nationally.
And they're being penalized for what? Working hard?
Nationally. Now,
losing their jobs.
Let me give you the other part of that, because I've sat here hearing about all these young, energetic teachers that were breaking their hearts. The reason why you have unions in any profession is to protect people with experience. Because believe me, if there's not union protection, the first thing management does, and as a matter of fact, I think almost all of us on this panel have experienced it, the first thing they do is lay off the experienced people, the people who make higher salaries, so they can hire the cheap people and pay them less. And that would be exactly what would be going on if the teachers union was not there to protect these teachers' jobs.
But they didn't. But they failed them, Joel.
You don't want to throw out all of your experience, and yeah, you don't want to discourage people in their first couple years of the job. But the truth of the matter is, young teachers, what you said about getting discouraged out of the universities, that's happening to young teachers every single year. The tenure of young teachers is less than 3 years.
The interesting thing, though, is that there's a paradigm shift that is going on across other teachers' unions around the country, where teachers' unions are willing to say and are saying there are other things that are more important to us than residency. There are other things that are more important to us than tenure. We need to take a look at what's happening in those, and they're seeing good results in what's happening in the classroom. We need to take a look to see what's happening in those other communities where teachers' unions have been more flexible. They've been able to maintain jobs. They've been able to protect experienced teachers, but they've also been able to make sure we have the best people.
It would help if they'd be willing to take some concessions to save their own jobs.
All right, next topic. For 2 months now, BP oil has been spewing into the Gulf of Mexico, threatening not only the environment, but the entire way of life down there. History has shown that presidents are often judged by how they handle and react to disasters, such as the Challenger explosion, Hurricane Katrina, 9/11. Those are just a few examples. How is the country judging this president's reaction to this disaster so far? He's not the cause of it, but he will be judged by how he deals with it.
I think he's getting perhaps a lot more scrutiny about his performance from people who had been his supporters, were expecting that he would have been faster on the draw in addressing the problem. Those in his administration had taken a look and probably saw it was more of a PR issue. They wanted to create some distance between his administration and how it was being handled. I think they trusted BP too much. That's an area of contention between people who support him and those that are now disappointed in his performance. I noticed in his speech that he threw Ken Salazar, his Secretary of Interior, under the bus. So I would expect that Salazar would be out of there within the next couple of months. Just today, BP threw its CEO for BP America under the bus, so it won't be too long before he will be out of there. The issue now, though, is not so much whether they are doing anything of substance to contain the oil and get rid of it. It's whether they're seeing it as we've got to do something to address a PR issue. And as long as that's their perception, people are going to be disappointed in the performance, because that's not dealing with the fact that this oil continues to gush and destroy valuable water and land.
You know, Obama is so unemotional and so detached from so many things, but you have to give him credit for getting the company to say, okay, we'll set aside $20 billion.
Absolutely. I was surprised at how his speech was sort of reviewed by the media. It was reviewed like a performance, not anything to do with the substance. I actually thought it was exactly right. You know, no one's going to be happy with him until you can turn on the TV and all that crap isn't still spewing out of that pipe.
Right.
Well, and he said he's not going to be happy himself.
Yeah, but here's what he did. You know, he did put a prosecutor and an inspector general in charge of the worst, most corrupt department in the federal government, the one that was supposed to provide oversight, but has been corrupted for years by putting the oil people in charge of regulating the oil industry. He put a prosecutor in charge of that department, and that was part of the speech. He appointed a very popular former Mississippi governor to be in charge of the long-term restoration after this whole thing ends. Restoration of the coast and the industries down there and everything else. And then the next day got the oil company to put up, you know, $20 billion that people can immediately start drawing on, not wait decades like they did after the Exxon Valdez to get paid off. You know, so I think it's all coming together, but it's not going to go good for him until the damn leak stops. And you can't expect anything else. But it was really hilarious to hear the ranking Republican on the Energy Committee, the guy who would be chairman of the Energy Committee if the Republicans would take over the House of Representatives, say that this was a shakedown, that the government should not have gotten BP to put up $20 billion, that this was poor BP and apologizing to BP.
That was incredible. You know, that to me was the mystery performance of the week. That's the performance I can't understand. How can you sit here, take a look at what has happened to, as BP calls them, these small people in the Gulf? Look at what's happened to our environment, which it'll be decades before some of this recovers, if it recovers at all. There are species of rare sea turtle that only survive in the Gulf, which are showing up dead in record numbers on the beach. Some of this we may never recover from it. But to apologize to BP, to say that the $20 billion, which may only be a drop in the bucket in terms of what we really need, was a shakedown. What's happening to the people in the Gulf of Mexico in those states is horrific. And to be able to do something, to give them something to hold on to, and not only to give them the money, but to set up a claims process with a third party. So you're not going to have BP saying, well, you forgot to dot this I, you didn't cross this T, we have to start all over again. It's something that is substantial. It, quite frankly, is the only thing he can do. He can't put on a scuba suit and go down there and stop the leak himself, but he can do something to try to make sure a couple of things happen. Number one, that people are taken care of and that they have the ability to have a fast, fair claims process. Secondly, he can go through a process of finding out what happened to make sure that if there were criminal things that happened, those issues are dealt with and people are prosecuted if there was criminal negligent behavior. Short of that, you know, and getting down there and plugging the leak himself, there's not really that much more he can do.
Kevin, but I do think he should be much more emotional and he should be down there much more.
For heaven's sakes, reality check here, folks. The whole country says that he's not doing the right job on this. It's the worst environmental disaster in our country's history. And if the roles had been reversed, and this had been a Republican in the White House, he'd be being shish kebabbed right now. This president waited and waited and waited and let the crisis become even larger so that he could ride in on government's white steed and say, government will take care of it. Government will take care of it. Well, I got news for everybody. Government can't save everybody from every catastrophe. This president was out there golfing. He was singing Hey Jude with Paul McCartney. He was on vacation.
You think
and then he decided
pay $20 billion?
And then he decided to shake down, and it was a shakedown.
Really?
BP caved. And I'll tell you what, that's a lot of money, but there's no guarantee that money is going to get to the right folks. None at all. The Exxon Valdez money never got to the right money. It got to the labor unions that put the president in power. The same thing is going to happen here, just like with the GM Chrysler payout.
The government had nothing to do with those payouts.
And there's no guarantee that this money is going to plug the hole. There's no guarantee that this money is going to divert future disasters. What we have here is a president who exploited this crisis, even said so because he wants cap and trade, which is a federal environmental tax. That's what he wants to come out of his disaster.
Because the oil industry funds Republicans, you really don't think he should have made them pay $20 billion?
I don't believe in the president of the United States shaking down any private industry.
All right, next topic. One of the top jobs in the University of Wisconsin system was awarded this week to Michael Morgan, one of Jim Doyle's cabinet members. The job, Vice President of Administration and Fiscal Affairs, pays $245,000 a year, nearly double what Morgan is making right now working for Doyle. There was no search. No one else was interviewed. Morgan doesn't have an academic background. Did the university jump at the chance to get someone with an intimate knowledge of exactly how things work in the Capitol, or did they simply take care of a high-ranking Democratic friend of Jim Doyle?
Mike Morgan, he's an attorney, and he's got administrative experience. He could, I think, ably perform the job for the system. I think the problem was one of process. They should have opened the process up so that even if they conducted it internally without the support of some outside consultants, they could have done this search on a bare bones budget. And at the end of the day, maybe they would have come up with Mike Morgan as the person that they wanted for the position, because after all, he still would have been the pick of the president of the system, Kevin Riley. And what they've now allowed to happen is a lot of disappointment in that process that they use to come up with someone that, frankly, may be good for the system in an environment where you will have a lot of people who will be leaving the Doyle administration. They will be looking for jobs to land in.
This is just the beginning. There'll be more.
And I agree with that. But they could have avoided all of that within the system if they had just gone through the regular process, or at least a minimal process to give people comfort that there was some fairness in the selection.
You put politics aside. This stinks to high heaven, whether you're a liberal Democrat or a conservative Republican. And you can say, well, everybody does it. Well, that doesn't make it right. To just give the guy a job, to not go through the bidding process, to not put it out there to interview other people, it just smells. It's terrible. And I have to tell you, by the way, nice suit, Gerard.
Well, thank you. Lovely suit.
Thank you. Mike Morgan is a blessed individual. When he was Secretary of the Department of Revenue, not once but twice, under his guidance, that department put out thousands and thousands of documents, tax documents, with private information right there on the envelopes to see, including Social Security numbers. And how was he handled by his boss, Jim Doyle? Within a month or two later, he was promoted to Secretary of Department of Administration. Now what happens? Jim Doyle sees, and the UW sees that, well, he and others are going to be out of job in a couple of months. Let's take care of him. I mean, come on, you can sugarcoat it all you want. You can spin it. The average person out there who's having trouble making ends meet sees this, and this guy's getting a 79% increase, and he didn't even have to go through an interview. He didn't have to go through the process. It stinks to high heaven.
This is absurd.
Yeah,
what we just heard over there, I was actually amazed that this showed up on the front page of the Journal-Sentinel. There was one Republican politician who attacked it, and that was enough just because he was attacking a highly placed black man in a high job in the state of Wisconsin. That was enough to get it on the front page of the Journal-Sentinel. And now to hear Republicans over there questioning one of the most qualified appointments you can imagine UW making. You know, a man who has been Secretary of Revenue and Secretary of Administration and is a qualified attorney, knows exactly how state government works. You don't want a nationwide search for a job for someone at UW who has to work with the state government. You want someone who knows state government intimately. No one questions Mike Morgan's qualifications, including Republicans, I don't believe, or his ethics. And this is just
there's a
junk.
process.
And the reality
is,
he could have probably gone to Foley and Larder, you know, in a moment and made the same kind of money.
He could have, but I think it says a lot about two things. First of all, that the UW recognized that he had what I believe is a unique skill set to get this job done. This is a job where we're looking at an $81 million system, payroll system that already has spent $26 million and not gotten done what it needs to get done. They need someone there who they know is going to be able to get this done, who has the experience, who has the ability, and that's Mike Morgan. He is a highly qualified individual. And you're right, he could have gone someplace else and probably made even more money. This idea that it's almost, you know, it's 79% more than he made, he's not doing the same job. He's not doing the same job. And you know, if we're upset about this, I then expect, Kevin, I expect you to be absolutely outraged at what happened to the UW system a couple of years ago, when we had someone in the UW system who handpicked their successor without any kind of a process at all, who's making 74% or 84% more than Mike Morgan is, and that's Barry Alvarez. Barry Alvarez didn't go through a search process to pick the next coach. Excuse me, let me finish, Kevin. Let me finish. He did not go through a search process to pick the next coach. He picked his right-hand man, didn't even go outside the department, and this guy's making $1.5 million a year, and nobody's complaining about that.
No, you're wrong on that. At the time that Barry Alvarez went through that process, if you want to call it that, of selecting Bielema as the coach.
Because he really didn't do anything.
People were upset, especially black coaches that felt that the opportunity for an open process would present itself with that search, and it did not happen. I've got no problem with Mike Morgan's capabilities.
No one does.
No one does. That's exactly right.
Is the process.
Correct.
And they could have arrived at.
This is political cronyism, and it smells.
Do you remember? Gerard, I know you do remember. Just a few years ago, when they were trying, Republicans in charge of the legislature were trying to rewrite the laws in order for Tommy Thompson to run the UW system. Now, and I didn't hear this side of the room complaining then.
Actually, there was no need to rewrite the laws in order for him to be selected to run the system.
Mike Morgan is this great guy that he should be able to stand up against all those other resumes.
That's the issue.
We move on. Back to BP for just a minute. Rick Horowitz has been watching the drama play out on the Gulf Coast and in the nation's capital. He knows what can happen when you put together that toxic mix of oil and politics, and he's been skimming off a few of his strongest impressions. Rick.
So, how's your Swedish? How's your Swedish when you're facing dozens of cameras on the White House driveway? BP's top guy, Carl-Henrik Svanberg, tried to explain that he and his big oil colleagues aren't really the greedy, heartless so-and-sos some folks think they are. We care about the small people, he said. He meant ordinary people. He meant the little guy. It was perfectly obvious. The commentariat went wild anyway. Look, there are plenty of reasons to rip this guy and his company. A less than perfect grasp of American idiom isn't one of them. Pounding corporate execs in a congressional hearing room is incredibly satisfying and takes far less energy than paying attention to what those execs were doing in the first place. Apologizing to corporate execs in a congressional hearing room makes you look craven and callous. But apologizing for apologizing just makes you look ridiculous. Some of the very same liberal pundits who bashed Barack Obama on Tuesday night were scrambling to revise their remarks on Wednesday afternoon after he squeezed $20 billion and counting out of BP. Now watch some of them try to take credit for putting the steel in Obama's spine. Conservative pundits also bashed Obama on Tuesday night. He was too passive, and they bashed him again on Wednesday afternoon after he got the $20 billion. He was overreaching. least they're consistent. Those spill containment plans must be working better than we thought. There hasn't been a single dead walrus washed ashore yet. Does anyone with a choice pull into a BP gas station until this whole thing is fixed? If the booms are on the surface of the water, but lots of the oil is under the surface, now how does... Do you think 20 billion $1 bills could soak up all the oil? Restoring the Gulf wetlands is an idea whose time has come decades ago. Free the Mississippi River, because there isn't enough on Obama's plate already. I wouldn't trust Sarah Palin to bag my groceries. Oh, and last thought, forget the Nobel Prize in physics. Where's the guy with the Nobel Prize in plumbing?
Yeah.
All right, we only have 30 seconds. Quick question, though. Watching the NBA playoff game last night, the final, if Doc Rivers became available, would he fit in well with the Bucks?
Oh, Scott Skiles has done quite well. It'd be tough to say goodbye, Scott.
Exactly. I think they are on the Scott Skiles train right now, and even if Rivers became available, I don't know that they'd want to pay the price tag and change the system.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
I'm sorry for the things I've done. I know that I'm the foolish one. Now that I see who's to blame, I'm so ashamed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the things I've said. Just like a child, I lost my head. I should have known from the start